right, so we're in an absolute mess today. What we're going to talk about is contemporary, the late modern, and the contemporary period of philosophy. Now, this is going to be a bit strange because what I want to do is because we've had to again because this epoch of philosophy is so long, is so expansive, right? We're covering such a massive period of time that I've had to. This is driving me nuts. All right, there we go. All right, so it's because again, this is encompassing such a massive period of time. Literally a few thousand years in the making here. Um, I wanted to, and I guess this is just up to the discretion of each individual, professor, instructor, how they're going to teach you the history of philosophy. But I really wanted to concentrate on that modern era of philosophy, specifically with Hume and Kant right there, because so much of what we see within contemporary philosophy, and then again, the period after, if you remember, we talked about philosophy prior and post Kant, right? That so much of philosophy was influenced by the thought of Immanuel Kant, right? The philosophy of Immanuel Kant, that in my estimation, so much of contemporary philosophy, and then again, even the late moderns after Kant, are just running with the presuppositions, running with the assumptions of Kantian philosophy. And so you're going to see a lot of the same themes that are coming up within the ideas within philosophers after Kant. And I would argue now this is where we're departing from strictly all right history of philosophy. What did this particular thinker think? What did this philosopher say? Where we're departing from that, and what I'm trying to do here in this sweet Moses, what was that? But what I'm trying to do now is to say, all right, let's look at some of the philosophers afterwards, some of the notable philosophers afterwards, and can we put our finger on any potential theme that seems to be similar, right? Now, again, we're ignoring some major philosophers, again, just because in the interest of time, and again, I'm hoping that you're really trusting that you're staying involved with the text, right? Either the official text or have to, the official text, but then also even possibly the recommended readings, such as Wittgenstein, Heidegger, Hegel, some of that stuff. But can we point to any really, really significant themes that especially are impacting culture right now, post Kant, that's running through this thread that's weaving itself through so much of contemporary philosophy? Now, I would say there is. And that's why this is not actually going to be the conclusion of our lectures. That's going to be something, well, I guess I can't say it's a surprise because you can just simply look at your at your course schedule there and see the last lecture there. But it's going to be something like postmodernism. Now, so having let the cat out of the bag, let's look at some of these philosophers, right? Now, after Kant, again, philosophy was just rocked, right? And so on the scene after Kant, we see all sorts of thinkers, but some of the big ones specifically are going to be people like, and this would be towards the end of the modern era of philosophy, would be like Nietzsche, right? Kierkegaard. Now, with Nietzsche, we start to see the roots of what we would call existentialism, right? This, how does it pertain to life, to existence, right? And that seems to be this important theme in philosophy. Well, why? Why does existentialism seem to start to rise and create this big splash, start to reveal itself through philosophy? Well, because of, I would argue, some of this Kantian stuff, right? This David Hume, Kant, all of these things, we start to see the very idea that you can actually get to truth. We start to see that what? We start to see that decay, right? Because these are just some of the logical implications, some of the obvious possible implications as to what happens when we prove philosophically that we can't know an external world, that all we have is access to our perceptions, right? Now, does that sound familiar? It should, because that sounds like subjectivism, right? That sounds like that started laying the groundwork, that's laying the foundation to this idea that the only real way we can get to the truth is by the sincerity of what I believe, my perceptions about reality versus your perceptions about reality. Now, pause that. Think about pause the lecture for a second and think about that. If we're starting to see this groundwork laid from Kant, from Hume, that we can't know any real metaphysical truths, if we can't know anything just beyond our own immediate experience, if we can't know anything about God, if we can't know anything about cause and effect, if we can't really know anything, if we're losing our ability to know anything that's outside of ourselves, the words that we used prior to this were the external world. If we're losing the ability to know anything about the external world objectively or absolutely or truly in a robust sense of that, well, then guess what? Like, that just leads to this idea, right, of subjectivism, right? Now, Kierkegaard was something like had like this existential appeal, right, about him, right? In fact, C. Stephen Evans, who wrote one of the required texts, he's a big fan of Kierkegaard. In fact, one of the modern experts, I guess I could say, on Kierkegaard would be at the college across the street here where I am. He's hence not here; he's in New York now, but he wrote a book on Kierkegaard. His name was Martijan, right? I think you spell the name Teitjaan. Very, very odd if you're an ignorant Southerner like myself. Different kind of name, right? Great guy. I've actually had many conversations with him. But Kierkegaard is the Christian version, the theistic version of this existentialism, right? Again, another important philosopher that we're just not going to really get into at this point. Now, in contrast to some of these just radical existentialists, right, you would see stemming from Hume the rise of another school of thought in modern or contemporary philosophy called logical positivism, right? And even after logical positivism, what we would call scientism, right? And again, because you've talked about Hume, this should sound familiar to you. This idea that, well, logical positivism was basically, look, if you can't verify it with the senses, right, and it's just not true logically or analytically, well, then it's just nonsense. It's just meaningless to even talk about it. So any sort of God talk, this would be A.J. Ayer, as you see on the slides here, any sort of God talk and all this sort of thing is just meaningless gobbledygook. It's not just that you can't know the truth about it, it's just meaningless because it can't be known with your senses, it can't be verified empirically, it's just not, there's no logical, it's not analytically true. Analytically, we mean, again, just in regards to logical relation, right? True by definition, that kind of thing. Well, it's just meaningless, right? So you have this existential branch of philosophy, and then you've got this hardcore empiricist, logical type of logical positivism that arises, and they're almost in contrast to one another in some sense. So again, so instead of just rationalism and empiricism, you see existentialism. What does it mean to my life? How do I experience this? What is this? How is this germane to my experience, to my existence, right? All this sort of thing. This would be Jean-Paul Sartre. This would be Camus. Again, Nietzsche, the roots are born there. And again, because of this whole idea that we can't really get to truth, right? We just can't really get to truth. And science itself, an extension of scientism, an extension of logical positivism, since scientism doesn't really say anything about my existential dilemma, right? Well, then how do we solve this? So you see the existentialist type philosophers, right? Again, I'm trusting you're getting this in your readings. Now, because of that we really can't get to this objective, ultimate sense of truth that's true for all people at all places at all times, metaphysics, all these sorts of things, metaphysical types of truths, since we can't get to them, we still have to function. We still have to try to have some sort of philosophy, right, in regards to ethics, in regard to how we understand, how we interpret what we think to be true, right? Well, now we start to see the rise of all of these competing theories of truth, like pragmatism, right? That which is true is that which works, right? Coherence theory of truth, right? This would be something like presuppositionalism, even if you're familiar in theistic or apologetic circles, right? If you're an apologetics junkie. This is where we get to, in contrast would be the correspondence theory, before I say that, right? So you've got the correspondence theory, that whatever's true is that which matches reality, right? But again, all of this modern philosophy has gotten away from that. You can't know anything about reality, right? And so you can see why now the correspondence theory has been reacted against so violently by modern philosophy, and by modern, I should say, contemporary type of philosophy. Why we have the existentialist stuff, why we have the pragmaticist stuff, why we have postmodernism, right? Postmodernism is this, that there are no meta narratives. It rejects this view that there are meta narratives. It rejects the view that we can know objective or absolute truths, right? Well, how did we get to that? Because we're seeing that ideas have consequences. You've got Hume, you've got Kant, you've got all these other philosophers that have argued that we can't know metaphysical truths, that we can't get beyond our own perceptions, that we can't get beyond experience. We can't get beyond just what science says. Well, voila, all of that to say, now we see the child of all of this type of thought, postmodernism, right? Now, am I oversimplifying a bit? Yeah, I'm oversimplifying a little. Some might even say, well, you're oversimplifying a ton. Well, maybe so. But we can see that there's still this connection. There's this thread that this is how we got to this point. This is how we get to the point of all of our cultural hot button topics, right? If you deny that there are something like natures and essences that we can know, right, that we can actually have knowledge of external to ourselves, these, at least as of the time of this recording, well, this is exactly how we get to these cultural hot button topics, like that there's no difference between a man and a woman, right? That gender is literally a construct of the mind and not something that is either true or false in regards to based in reality, right? So you may have thought, well, how did we come to this? Philosophy. All of these things that you thought had nothing to do with your everyday life, right now when you watch the news or read a story or whatever it is that you're doing, and you come across a cultural hot button topic like sexuality, there's no nature or essence that has anything to do with sexuality. Gender, that gender is completely fluid. There's no nature or essence to a man or a woman that can be known externally outside of their own mind, right? Marriage, the nature of marriage, whether or not it's something we discover, right, external to us, or something we invent, right, that we construct, right, and again, just by our own minds, right, subjective, right. So we see this radical influence on all of these various disciplines because of postmodernism. It results in postmodernism, results in so much contemporary philosophy. And so what is the impact of that? Well, here it is. What is reality? Well, reality is what we construct that, right? Reality is determined by our cultural identity, right? Reality is constructed by my own tribe, my own culture, my own race, my own gender, my own whatever tribe or camp we want to get into, right? This is where we get into critical theory, right? What is truth? Well, since truth is not something external to ourselves that we can discover, right? Remember all the rejection of Hume, Kant, all of this kind of stuff, the logical result of that, right? Since truth is not something that's external to ourselves that we can discover, well, then truth must be something that we determine, right? We decide what is true, whether it be because it works for our culture, whether it be because our culture just determines what is true, whether it be because that's all we can know, right? All of this is the result. So much of this, I should say, is the result of this. And so it results in this radical subjectivism, right? And or relativism, right? So you think, where did all this moral relativism come from? Where did all this radical subjectivism come from, that I can determine my own reality and I can create my own essence, right? All these sorts of things. Well, it came from, it was the logical result of David Hume, Kant, Jean-Paul Sartre, Nietzsche, right? The denial of truth, right? The denial of truth outside of ourselves that can actually be known. these are the results of that. These are the seeds that have come into fruition, right? So again, even ethics, like right and wrong, the vacuum of relativism has swallowed up any sort of objective or absolute sort of ethic, right? Because that's, again, if there's a truth about reality that we ought to behave or align with, yet we just can't know such things, we can't know metaphysical type truths, right? Well, then again, what happens to ethics? They're gone, right? And so all we're left with is a sort of individualistic or cultural relativism in regards to ethics, right? This is why when you go into the ethics course, this will be so important. Now, we do still have this sort of modernism versus postmodernism that's still in this fallout stage of all of these philosophical ideas. And modernism would be, remember that the modern era philosophy, right, was something like, well, we can still know all these scientific sorts of truths. Those are really true. But we just can't know any sort of metaphysical types of truths, like whether or not God exists, whether or not ethics are real, whether or not they're real types of truths, that kind of thing, right? When you start to talk about spirituality or ethics or any of that sort of stuff, right? That's just what we can't know, but we can know scientific types of truths. We can know that science gives us real truth, right? That's just a fallout of the modernism, right? But postmodernism is because of this vacuum, this spiritual vacuum that was left, right? That we can't know about ethics, that we can't know about God, we can't know about deeper truths outside of science, non-material truths. Well, postmodernism tried to fill that gap, right? And so you have the idea of postmodernism slipping into culture, that, well, all religions can be true, because again, remember, truth is not something that we determine outside of ourselves, but by something that's within us, right, or within our culture, our tribe, our identity, that kind of thing. And so you see this contrast between modernism versus postmodernism. Some philosophers, some thinkers want to say that we are completely postmodern in our thought now. You've got some influential philosophers that want to say, well, no, they're still just arguing about whether or not God exists. They're still just arguing about what is or isn't ethically acceptable, what is right or wrong, if there are any morals. And that's what we can't know, but we still know that the earth revolves around the sun, right? Those sides. So that's basically modernism, right? Now, oddly enough, even scientific thinkers such as the late Stephen Hawking, whether he realizes it or not, even he was arguing for sort of postmodernism, in the sense that even with all the scientific data that he had accumulated and expounded and even contributed, was really no more true than anybody else's theory, so long as it worked, right? So long as that their other theory could explain the data in any other way, well, then his theory is no more objectively true than any of the other theories, right? Well, that's just postmodernism, right, in some sense, right? That's just subjectivism. Now, what I want to do, and again, this is going to be a crossover type lecture, because what I'm trying to argue is that the fallout, if I'll go back up to the slide here, that the fallout of all of this philosophy, this contemporary philosophy, has resulted in postmodernism. I have a lecture on postmodernism and the results of that, and how do we try to counteract that? What do we do with postmodernism? And so I'm going to give a crossover lecture on that. If you've already had the Worldview course, this is going to be a great review for you, because now that should even make more sense to you, now that you see that postmodernism is the result of all of these philosophical ideas that have trickled down into culture. That should even make more sense to you now. You should get more out of it. However, if you haven't had the Worldview course, then you're not missing a beat. You'll get everything in regard to that, because you're going to see postmodernism talked about. We're going to try to go through it and even offer up some critiques about it. But you're going to have, if you even haven't even had the Worldview course where I talk about postmodernism, you're going to be ready for it right now, because you see this logical progression of ideas, right? Where this postmodernism has come from. So then if you do take the Worldview course, it's going to, again, you're just going to be a step ahead of everyone else. So this is the kind of a short lecture here, because I wanted to introduce how we got to this concept of postmodernism before we actually discuss it. Now, for the actual views of each of those philosophers that we mentioned here, again, I'm trusting that you're following along with your text, and I'm just trying to supplement heavily what you're learning there with these lectures. So you're going to look at some of these philosophers here, and hopefully, again, when you combine the lecture with the text, this is going to make so much sense for you, and you're going to see how we got to the place that we are in regards to postmodernism. So I'm going to go ahead and give you an official peace out, right, for the course in the history of philosophy, because I'm going to give you my postmodern, or my lecture on postmodernism as the send out of the course. And hope you enjoy that. Hope you really pull all of these things together as we discuss postmodernism. And until next time, until next course, or until you watch these again, we'll see you.